Hail, by Stephen Lake. So Kevin, what are you planning on doing this weekend? I hear there's a really great flick showing at the local movieplex, said Mara in a giggly sweet voice. Kevin, her classmate, who was sitting next to her, stared silently out the window at the darkening afternoon sky above and sighed lightly. Mara frowned at this. Hey! Are you listening to me? She barked. He again paid no attention to her as he continued to watch the clouds slowly building into dark, ominous thunderheads. A flash of lightning appeared a moment later and danced playfully off the edge of the clouds. Several more came moments later, and branched out across the sky in every direction, like the limbs of a tree. Kevin, are you listening to me? Screeched Mara. She liked Kevin a lot. But he never seemed to take notice of her, and this drove her crazy. Just then the school bell rang, which signaled the end of classes for the day. The kids in the room cheered, and then hurried out into the hall to exchange their school books for portable games, music players, skateboards, keys to their cars and much more. After several moments, Kevin got up as well, and began walking out of the classroom. Hey! Where are you going? You still haven't answered me, protested Mara, now thoroughly upset at him for ignoring her. Kevin stopped in his tracks, and turned to look at her out of the corner of one eye. I can't go out with you, he replied with flat, cold antipathy. Upon hearing this, Mara's jaw nearly hit the floor with the force of an atomic bomb. What? Why not? She screamed with the ferocity of a feral animal. Kevin sighed. She did this to him every day, and it was becoming annoying. I've got a club meeting this afternoon. After that I need to help my dad at the funeral home. I've told you that before, he said flatly. Mara raised a finger at this, and opened her mouth to scold him, but then stopped cold as though suddenly turned to stone. She then glared angrily at him as her eyes flared like a raging bonfire. He, in turn, furrowed his brow before eventually turning, and making his way to the science lab. Mara soon lowered her finger, grabbed her school bag, and stormed out the door after him. Don't you ignore me, you pig-headed snob. How can you treat someone who low? She immediately froze in her tracks, her face changing from an expression of fiery indignation to one of horrified embarrassment. She then lowered her head, and tried to pretend like nothing was wrong, even though she knew full well that she'd almost made one of the most horrible mistakes in her life. Namely admitting that she loved one of the biggest science geeks in the entire school. Confessing this openly would have shattered her social standing with the more elite girls in her class, and she couldn't allow that. If any of them heard about this, it would cause her a lot of trouble. Kevin soon reached the science lab, and stepped through the door. Mara quickly looked around the hallway to see if anyone was watching her. Seeing that nobody was, she took a deep breath, and then hurried into the science lab. Inside she found two guys, one girl, and a teacher near the back of the room. Hearing her enter, the teacher looked up and smiled at her. Hi there. Can I help you? He asked. Mara blushed as she shook her head. No. I was just curious who was in here, she said. Want to join the science club? Shouted one of the guys. You silly fool. She'll never join our group. Girls of her status don't mingle with nerds like us, said the girl. The boy rubbed his head in shy embarrassment, and said, That's too bad. We could really use someone as cute as her in our group. The girl, who was sitting next to him, jumped up and began screaming at him. Are you saying that, just because I'm a nerd, I'm not pretty? Is that what you're saying, Raymond? Well? Do I look ugly to you? The boy waved his hands in mock defense. No, Sarah. I'm not saying that at all. But she is, well, prettier than you. The girl fumed angrily at this. Why, you ungrateful, pompous, sanctimonious, block-headed idiot, she screamed. She then began to hit him over the head with one of her textbooks. Mara grinned at this as the teacher tried to break it up. Raymond. Sarah. Knock it off, you two. There's no need to fight, shouted Kevin. The two soon stopped their bickering and stared at him in confusion. But she started it, protested Raymond. But you, said Sarah. Enough. We're here to do science, not start a war, said Kevin, with a powerful sound of authority in his voice. Mara's eyes widened at this, as a small, thin smile grew slowly across her face. Nerd or not, this was one of many reasons she liked him. Then what's she here for? Asked Sarah as she pointed at Mara. She has a crush on me. So she's probably here to ask me on a date again, which I won't do, and she knows that, said Kevin flatly. Upon hearing this, Mara's face immediately turned blood red as she stiffened, and began to shudder in utter embarrassment. She then turned and rushed out of the room crying as though her heart had been stabbed through with a knife. The teacher, Raymond and Sarah all looked at the door as they watched her go, then turned back to Kevin in stunned curiosity. That girl has a crush on you? Asked Raymond. Kevin chuckled, and then nodded. Yeah. Silly, isn't it? He asked. Sarah smiled at this. I don't think it's silly at all. In fact, it's very romantic, she replied. Raymond looked at her in disgust. Romantic? I think it's gross. Who'd want to fall in love with a girl? A brand new lab set, sure. But a girl? You'd have to be out of your mind. Cute girls are only for looking at, not dating. Sarah shot Raymond an ice-cold look of rage powerful enough to kill a horse. Raymond saw this and immediately wanted to run for cover. Sarah then began to scream at and berate him for his clear lack of understanding of women and the things they liked. However, as she did, Kevin kept his head down and his eyes in his book as he remained completely calm and aloof throughout all of this. His ability to maintain a solemn composure in any kind of situation was commendable. Part of that had come from his many years of working in his dad's funeral home. However, as the fight between his two clubmates continued on, Kevin perked up slightly as his ears detected a strange noise that was beginning to trickle into the room. After a moment he called everyone to be quiet. As they did, Sarah looked at him in confusion. What's the matter? She asked. Kevin closed his book and stood up as he tried to locate the source of the noise. I don't know, but I think something's coming, he replied. Mara raced down the hallway, and around the corner, where she stopped and leaned against the wall as she tried to compose herself. She was nearly ready to cry like a baby. But that was the last thing she wanted to do, especially at a time like this. She loved Kevin with all her heart, and yet his response to her had cut her to the core like the sharpest knife. You idiot! How could you be so cold? I love you, she whispered to herself as she fought back her tears. Just then she jumped as a loud pop sounded next to her. It was like someone had hit the wall with a sledgehammer and shattered part of the masonry. It had even made the wall vibrate briefly. Then she heard another pop, and another immediately after that. Curious of what was happening, she opened her eyes and looked to her left to see 3 large holes in the wall with matching holes in the floor just a few feet away from them. Another hole, just like the previous 3, soon appeared, followed by several more. Curious of what was causing this, she walked over to a window and saw something that frightened her terribly. She immediately turned and ran back down the hall towards the science lab as several more holes appeared in front of and behind her. Raymond and Sarah looked at him briefly in confusion before laughing. It's probably just the band practicing outside, said Raymond. Suddenly they all heard a loud pop, followed by several more. Wait a second, I hear it too, said Sarah. Just then a ceiling tile and a lab desk exploded in a spray of ice, foam, and black lacquer tabletop. Sarah screamed as the teacher swore. What was that? Cried the teacher. The popping sounds quickly grew louder as they rapidly increased in frequency, like the barrage of 1,000 artillery shells upon their little building. Car alarms then began going off as the sounds of shattering glass and screaming people were quickly added to the conflagration. The 4 of them then got up and hurried to the window. Outside was an apocalyptic scene like no other. The handful of cars that were still in the teacher's parking lot were covered in dozens of 1- and 2-inch wide holes as more were continuing to be added. They then spotted the marching band, who'd been practicing on the football field, scattering in every direction in a vain search for cover. However, try as they might to find a safe place to hide, their efforts proved futile as slab after slab of hail fell out of the sky and slew each of them, one by one, until none of them remained alive. The teacher swore at this. "What the hell is that stuff?" he cried. Just then several more pops echoed behind them, followed by a series of screams that came from the hallway. Mara soon appeared through the doorway of the science lab just as several hailstones exploded through the wall behind her. "Help me!" she screamed in horror. Immediately realizing the danger they were in, the teacher ran across the room to a large metal chemical safe, and began working the combination in a frantic effort to unlock it. Kevin, and the others, upon realizing what was happening, immediately took cover, as best they could, behind a nearby counter. The popping sounds that the hail was creating soon became a thunderous roar, causing the four of them to cower in fear as glass, ceramic, metal, wood, and other materials sprayed all around the room like lethal drops of flaming water. Finally, having successfully unlocked the safe, the teacher threw the handle on the door, swung it open, and then heaved a metal rolling rack, that was stored inside, out into the lab where it was immediately pounded to scrap by the hail. "Quick! Everyone! Get in here! Hurry!" he shouted to the four scared teenagers. Not wasting any time, Kevin immediately grabbed Mara, who was frozen in fear, and shouted, "Follow me! Hurry!" They then rushed across the room amidst the deadly conflagration of ice, metal and other debris, and leapt into the chemical safe. However, to their dismay, it wasn't quite big enough for the five of them. Even so, they did their best to wedge themselves in as tightly as they could as the teacher slammed the door shut to protect them. He then locked the safe from the inside to ensure that the door wouldn't accidentally open and expose them to danger again. They all then waited patiently for the carnage around them to subside. A few moments later the light in the small chemical safe flickered, and then went out. This caused its already packed in like a can of sardines occupants to nearly fly into a panic. Everyone, that is, except Kevin, who remained surprisingly calm. "Stop it, everyone! This doesn't help us any. Just calm down. We'll be fine," he shouted. This did little to alleviate their panic. However, it did have the surprising effect of driving the two girls in the safe to hug their male teenage counterparts, much to both men's chagrin. However, for Sarah and Mara, this was the single best thing that ever happened to them. Namely, being not only close to their greatest crush, but also pressed up tightly against each of their bodies. Mara then looked lovingly up at Kevin, but soon felt defeated when she noticed that he was not only ignoring her, but also appeared completely disinterested. "Why aren't you paying attention to me? I mean, look at how close we are," she said. With a stern, unwavering face, he replied, "I'm trying to keep us safe." At first Mara was upset at this. But then, when she realized what he was doing, her heart leapt within her. He was trying to protect her, and she hadn't realized it. She then turned her attention to the safe's door, and listened to the dull thunder of continuous impacts against the safe as though someone was beating on it with a hammer. It made her draw closer to Kevin, if that was even possible, in sheer terror at the thought of what was happening outside. Whatever it was, it had to be the purest, most unrestrained hell on earth that they'd ever seen, but with a frozen twist. Eventually the noises outside faded away until it became as quiet as a grave. After determining that it was now okay to exit the safe, the teacher slowly turned the handle and opened the door carefully. Seeing that the skies above had cleared, he opened the door further, and then leaned out. He soon noticed that, not only was the roof completely gone, but so was the entire school building, and a number of others around them. He then pushed the door open completely and stepped out to find himself standing in a field of ice nearly 2 feet deep. "What happened?" he whispered. The 4 students soon joined him in the open and marveled at what they saw before them. Sarah soon cupped her hands over her lips and began to cry. "Oh my God," she sobbed. "Be careful where you step. There's a lot of dangerous stuff on the floor around here," said the teacher. Kevin, paying close attention to his surroundings, soon noticed something peculiar about the hail in the room. Wanting to see it in better detail, he reached down and picked up a large, 2-inch diameter piece that lay at his feet. As he did, he was shocked at just how good a shape it was in. To come this far, and do this much damage, and yet remain so intact, was a huge accomplishment. But the part that bothered him the most was how much it weighed. Even though it was only 2 inches wide, it felt like he was holding a 20-pound cannonball. "What is that?" asked Raymond. "I think it's what just fell on us," replied Kevin. He then looked out through what had once been the south wall of the science lab and saw the hail-covered devastation that lay everywhere around them. "Once we're sure it's safe, I think we should go looking for survivors," he said. "Are you sure there's going to be any?" asked Raymond. Kevin tossed the piece of hail in his hands to the ground, and frowned. "I don't know. But we should at least look." Rickenbaum, a man of dark and terrifying secrets, looked out over the ravaged remains of what had once been the southern half of the city of Bloomsburg and chuckled with evil satisfaction. "Did we get him?" he asked in a low, rumbling voice. A man next to him, who was holding a large pair of field glasses, studied the city streets below them with dismay. "I can see his car, but it looks like it's unharmed. It must have been armored extremely well to survive that. In fact, I don't see any casualties in his convoy either," he said. Rickenbaum frowned. "How unfortunate," he muttered. The man with the binoculars soon lowered them and glared at Rickenbaum. "Since the hail failed to stop him, we need to find another way, as he can't be allowed to arrive at the conference." "If he does, he'll ruin it," said the man. "Ruin it?" interrupted Rickenbaum. "Not likely. Just look. The building they were going to hold it in has been completely demolished. So there will be no meeting today, or any time soon. Therefore, our job here is done. So come, we must leave now." He then turned and walked several paces before pausing and putting his hand on the shoulder of a white-clad scientist who stood next to him. "Well done, Doctor," he said with demonic glee. He then continued towards his car as he chuckled darkly. The scientist, who had been the one to create the powerful hailstorm that had ravaged the city, dropped to his knees as an expression of horror and remorse grew across his face. "What have I done? What have I done?" he cried. The man with the field glasses shook his head, turned and, grabbing the scientist, yanked him to his feet, and said, "Come, you have more work to do." The end.